Hi, I'm Kent. Let's make a speckled glaze. Relatively early on in my pottery journey, I discovered I like speckled glazes. I found a few from my local pottery store and just picked them randomly and really liked the effect. I think in general, I like speckles both in the clay body and in the glaze, and I've tried a few times to try and add speckles. Haven't had a whole lot of success yet, and I want to go ahead and revisit that. A good while ago, I saw from Joe Thompson with Old Forge Creations that you could take glaze and sinter it and use that to put into another glaze. The sintered glaze would wind up being the speckles in the new glaze. I had some leftover old glaze and went ahead and sintered it and tried it out, and it did not work as I expected. It had pretty marginal results. I think the glaze composition was just wrong. It didn't wind up sintering well or melting the right way in the new glaze that I put it on. Since then, I found a recipe by Joe that is for speckles specifically. That's what we're going to do now, is we're going to try out that recipe. Here it is. I pulled it off of Glazy, Old Forge Blizzard Sprinkle. So this is blue speckles inside of a white base glaze. I'm not going to use his white base glaze. I think it should work in any glaze. And this one has cobalt carbonate in it right here, which winds up with a very vivid blue. So this is the recipe. It adds up to 100 grams, and the additions are the colorants. Here it's the cobalt. I found that mixing in my own recipes with cobalt, that cobalt seems to be a pretty strong colorant, and 3% seems to be a relatively large amount. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up this recipe as is. I was very tempted to go and mix up a larger batch and try some other colorants in it, but I think I'm going to take it easy one step at a time. So I'm just going to mix up this recipe as is right now. We'll experiment later. So the recipe has a lot of ingredients that I already have. So the cobalt, I already mentioned, I had that already going up. Kaolin, I have that. It's sitting over here. Here's my EPK, whitening, I have that, and then silica. So these are all ingredients that Joe has in his first 5 recipes, so I've had them sitting around for a while. What I didn't have is custard feldspar. It's this one here. So my last pottery supply run, I went ahead and picked this up so I could make this recipe specifically. So the idea behind this is to create a glaze that fires at a higher temperature than what I glaze my pots at. So I glaze my pots at around cone 6. And Joe does the same. He actually glazes his at 5.5. I'm actually following Joe's firing schedule. He has it on Glazy. I went ahead and decided to copy it since I'm using a lot of his glazes. So I guess I fire a 5.5 as well. The idea is to mix this up, and the inspiration for this apparently is a cone 10 glaze. I know nothing about different cone glazes. I haven't mixed any up, but I trust Joe. He knows what he's doing here. So I'll mix up this glaze, let it dry out, and then once it's dry, I can put it into a bisque fire. The bisque fire will then sinter the glaze pieces together. Basically means that they will partially melt and fuse together, put them into another glaze, a liquid glaze, that I will then glaze the pots with. All those little chunks that are from the sintered glaze will be in that new glaze and stick to the outside of the pot. Because they're cone 10, they will only melt a little bit. Therefore, they'll create the speckled effect in the cone 6 glaze, which will melt like normal. That's the theory from what I understand anyways. Let's go ahead and try it out. So here are all the ingredients. I'm going to pull out my scale and measure all these up, and I'll grab my mask since we're going to be doing dusty stuff. I think I'm just going to do a 100 gram batch. Probably way more than I need, but might as well. So tear that out. So custard feldspar is up first. I need 40 grams. And my mask. Silica. Next up is the white man. That's the base recipe. So from here, we go ahead and add the colorants. And as I mentioned, I did a cobalt, left 3 grams. Okay, so if this were a real glaze, I would then go ahead and add water. I don't think I want to add that much water though. My goal is actually to dry this back out so I can sinter it. So I think I want to put in just enough water that can mix this up really well, which also means I don't really have to measure it. So we grab another container with some water in it, and we will do that. Right, here's some water, and I'm just going to sprinkle in the glaze. All right, let me grab my immersion blender and we'll mix that up. All right, that looks pretty mixed up to me. Now this needs to dry out, and the best way to do that is give it as much surface area as possible and make it warm. So I'm going to pour like half and half here. All right, I'm going to loosely cover these. I think I'm going to take them inside where it is warmer. It's pretty chilly out here, and it will take even longer to dry. Once they dry out, we'll come back to it. So the sprinkle mix has all dried out now. It cracked a little bit while it's drying. I wasn't sure if this is supposed to go in the glaze fire like this and get broken apart, or if you break it apart and put it into the glaze fire. Reading through Joe's instructions, it looks like the answer is to break it apart now. I guess it might be hard to break apart once it's been sintered. So we're going to break it into pieces that will wind up being the speckle size. I don't really have a tool for this, so I'm just going to use the back of this carving tool. This is breaking apart very easily. We'll dump these together. I think more surface area will be useful, so I'm just going to put it in one of these lids. I think there's a balance between crushing it into small pieces versus just forming back into powder. All right, so we're going to call that good enough. There's definitely a variation in size. Next step is to put this into some bisqueware so we can fire it. I have these pieces here. Joe's instructions said to make it a very thin layer, but I think I have too much to do that, so we'll see. My bisque firing's ready to go, so I'm going to load these in and we'll check it out. We'll see if it's entered or not.
We had a good bisque fire and these came out. Nothing crazy happened in the kiln, so that was a good thing. One thing I noticed right away is the colors are already starting to change. The cobalt in its powder form is purplish, and this will wind up a very vibrant blue. Looks like maybe we're halfway there. The next thing to do is to see if these centered. So according to Joe, I need to take some of these and put them in some water. So I'm going to fish out a few here. And I'll go put this in some water and let it sit. If it dissolves, then they didn't center and we would actually need to fire it at a higher temperature. If it doesn't dissolve, then it's good and we're ready for the next step with speckles. Good news, it looks like our speckles are good to go. These here have been sitting in water for a while now. I actually forgot about them. And they are still solid. There's some small little chunks floating around, but that's just some of the fine powder. So we should be able to put these in our glaze. One thing I'm curious about is if these large pieces can break apart some more. When the speckled glaze combination was dry, it was breaking apart really easily, and some of these pieces seem way too small. So I'm curious how hard it is to break apart this way. It's definitely harder, and I'm still winding with the fine powder, so not too sure if it makes much difference. So I'm going to dump all these into the same bowl here, and I'm going to have an interesting inside here. I guess that's why it says to use a piece of bisqueware you don't care about. Looks like it stained the inside. That's fine. All right, they're a little chunky, so I just mixed them up a little bit. Some of these pieces may be a bit large, and I think a lot of them are probably too small. I don't have a sieve the right size, so we're just going to use this as is and see how it goes. So next up will be to glaze some pots. Off camera, I went ahead and prepared this glaze. The recipe for the speckles has an associated recipe for the base glaze. The recipe says it's just a clear base glaze and it has 4% zircopax in it. Zircopax is an opacifier, it's white. So instead of mixing up that specific base glaze, I went ahead and used Joe's first 5 recipe and added the same 4% of zircopax to it. So that's here. Looking at some of the examples Joe posts online, looks like about up to 1% are reasonable amounts. So I'm going to do 0.5% and 1%. All right, I just separated out some glaze. I've got 200 grams worth in this container, and I want to start with 0.5%. So it means I need 1 gram, which is a tiny amount. So I'm actually going to switch over to my high precision scale. So 1 gram. There you go, 1 gram, hair over. Put that in. Now my next addition will be to get it up to 1% total, so I'll need another 1 gram. I can put that in just yet. So I'm gonna mix this up, we'll dip a pot, and then I'll put this addition in. So I'll put this off to the side. I'm gonna use my immersion blender and mix this up like normal. And I've prepared a few pots. These I went ahead and just put a clear base glaze on the inside. So we'll just dump it in and use displacement. Oh, that's cool. Definitely are blue pieces in my glaze. All right, we'll dump in the other 0.5%, give it another whirl. And do another pot. This will be 1%. Definitely has some more. All right, so I will set this off to the side. And what I didn't show you is I made an oops. I got a decimal point wrong and started putting in more of the speckle mix than I needed. So I have no idea how much is in here, but it's more than it should be. So this is a separate batch here. We'll just go ahead and mix it up. So we'll have maybe super speckles. All right, I'll go ahead and mark this one since it's the special one. The other two should be pretty obvious to tell from each other. I'm gonna let these fully dry and they'll go into my next glaze firing. Let's see what they look like. We had a good firing and the speckled pots are out. Here they are. So first we're gonna play a game. Which pot is which? Which one is the 0.5%? Which one is the 1%? And which one was my mistake where I put in way too much? Can you guess? So I put these down randomly, and so I actually don't know the answer. I think this one's the 0.5%. I think this one's the 1%, and this one is the too much. Let's see if I'm right. Nope, this is the 1%. This is the one where I put in too much, and that means this one here is the 0.5%. So you can tell some noticeable differences between these. There's some really fine speckles and some larger ones. The speckles actually wound up running a little bit. I wasn't quite expecting that. So there's some small vertical streaks here where they seem to melt a little bit and run down, but by and large they are intact. That may be an artifact of the base glaze that I used instead of the original one that Joe suggested. This one may have some more fluxes, so things melted better. Overall, I'm happy with the result. There's a faint hint of blue in the background of this, and I think that is all those fine little speckle particles that I didn't sieve out of the glaze versus the inside, which is just white. I'm not too sure what I think about that. In the past, I've had some very stark contrasts on the pots and it doesn't look right. So if just the bright blue was next to a stark white, that may be a little bit jarring versus having this kind of more blue in the background. Kind of evens it out a little bit. I do think I want to try sieving things out in the future though and seeing what that does. And between the 0.5% and 1%, I'm not too sure of a huge preference. Maybe the 1% is better. I'm going to call that a success, and I think there's lots of opportunities to play with this more. Kind of most naturally occurring speckles wind up being brownish, and so I can try some ingredients that would give me that color. I can also go crazy and use mason stain to make speckles of arbitrary colors. That could be fun, trying to create some really wild speckles in my pots. Joe also mentioned mixing the speckles in with slip. And since I slip cast my pots, that seems like a very natural thing to do. So I want to try that out as well and see what happens. So that was fun. Let me know, do you have a preference between the different percentages? If you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks.